because for the panelists, one of the things that I'm aware of is how about the spouse and the children of long haul truck drivers who are exposed to this, and there's got to be stresses on them as well. So to everybody, welcome. I am your moderator, Chris Harris, Safety Dog, and the host of the Dog on It Trucking podcast. With us today, we have two guests. We have Miss Ellen Voya from the Women in Trucking Association, and we have Mr. Norm Weininger. Did I say that right, Norm? Weininger. I'm sorry, and he's the Chief Clinical Officer of SPAR. So with that, let me welcome our host, Naveen from the Trucking Network. Naveen.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you. I want to say welcome and thank you to each and everyone, especially our great speakers and Chris Harris. And I want to welcome all our attendees today who are listening to this great panel. And I'm Naveen Nair, editor, and I hesitate to say CEO because of COVID. I'm editor of Trucking Network. We are a national publication for the industry and organize hiring events to support the trucking industry for their hiring needs. And lately, we started doing these educational webinars. And we invite great expert people, fellows from the industry to share their knowledge and to educate our fellows, our industry people. And today we have two great people with us, Ellen Voya, President of Women in Trucking, and Norman Weininger, right, Norman? And
Weininger.
I apologize. Big apologies. And they will be discussing today the topic, how truckers are stressed out, how their mental health and physical health is impacting overall their own health, their families, the atmosphere around them, and even when they are not very happy or strong, how it impacts their work as well. And the whole scenario then ends up to the work environment and the growth of the company. So I will hand over to this microphone to Chris Harris now, who's Safety Dog, one of the oldest knowledgeable person, I would say. Not knowledgeable, not in that sense, Chris. Very experienced, from the industry who's dealing with helping the industry for the safety. If they have any questions, or they can just reach out to him. And today he will be handling this this webinar and will be asking questions to Alan and Norman, and how we can make it a better place for the industry. Chris, please.
Thanks, Naveen. And yes, I'm probably the oldest on the panel, but or I'm not on the panel, but you know what I mean. I'm the oldest in this virtual room, at least perhaps. I will turn it over to Ellen now. Ellen, first of all, thank you so much for taking the time and joining us today. It is a topic that is one close to my heart because I have experienced mental illness in my family. And so I know how it can impact all kinds of people. So with that, Ellen, please take it away.
Thank you so much. So, okay, everyone can see my screen right now?
Yes.
All right, now I need to find my button here. Okay, I just want to introduce Women in Trucking Association. We're a nonprofit organization. We represent all women in the industry, but today I'm going to talk about drivers in particular, but we do represent women who own dealerships, women who design trucks, schools, any women in the industry, but 15% of our members are men, and it's because they support our mission. About 8% of our members are in Canada. We're in 10 countries. We're based in the United States. It's pretty simple: encourage the employment of women in the industry, promote accomplishments, and minimize obstacles. And today we're going to talk about some obstacles because of COVID-19. So we did a survey with FreightWaves, and it was on the internet. So there were Canadian companies in there, and over-the-road drivers females make up 10.2% of the population. Now I know in Canada you're about 3%. But this was done over the internet, so it did include North America. we're less than 25%, less than 24% of women make up management. And we all know that we need diesel techs. So didn't mean to skip to that one so fast. So anyway, diesel techs make up about 5%. So let's talk about how COVID-19 has affected our drivers. And I reached out, we have a Facebook group, and I can reach out and get lots of insight from drivers. So I asked them, what challenges are you facing? And I'm gonna go back to the last slide, because there's three things. There's physical challenges, mental challenges, and then financial challenges. And so we're gonna talk about each of those and how they're affecting our drivers. So I'm gonna touch on physical well-being first. First, it's the stress. They're getting burned out. They were worried about getting the bug, their stomach and digestive system, getting headaches. Their sleep patterns were being messed up because some of them were running harder, some of them weren't. They were trying to find facilities. The expectations on them were extreme, especially like delivering toilet paper and hand sanitizer. I mean, the push was on to get those loads delivered. Asthma attacks because of wearing the masks. Breathing issues because of the mask, and also trying to unload a trailer in heat wearing a mask. That was stressing out your drivers. And then the weight issues, and maybe Norm will touch on some of this as well, but some of the issues were they were putting on weight. Stress tends to make us eat, it's stressful eating, and so that was an issue. Plus, drivers were unable to stop and get good food at a sit-down restaurant because all of our sit-down restaurants were closed. And so then they were expected to go through a drive-through, and we all know that you can't put a tractor trailer in a drive-through, so they couldn't even use that. It was getting harder for them to find good, fresh, healthy foods. So they were putting on, and also, as one of them said, the gyms were closed. So that even made it worse. I'm sorry, I apologize for the screen here. My button is getting a little ahead of me. But anyway, they couldn't use the gyms. And one trucking company owner told me that he told his female drivers, get out and start walking. Well, the level of harassment that they were experiencing from their male peers increased considerably to the point where at one time they had to call the police in. And I think it's just because we're all just at our edge, we're stressed out, and I'm sure Norm will talk more about how that affects our drivers mentally, but these poor drivers didn't want to get out and walk around their truck because they were being harassed by male drivers. So, and then facility challenges. They couldn't find bathrooms. Some states were actually shutting down their rest areas because they didn't want to clean them. And also when they go to a shipper to load or unload, they're not allowed to use their restrooms because of COVID-19 issues. And so they're putting out porta potties for these drivers. So then how are they supposed to find a way to wash their hands with a porta potty? So it was just, it was really becoming difficult for them to stay clean and work on their physical well-being. And then again, they were talking about the masks and having to load and unload. So facility challenges were also part of their experience. And then I'm going to touch a little bit on their mental well-being and let Norm do more of that. But depression, drivers admitted that they were feeling depressed. And one of them made a comment that I thought was really interesting. And she said, I can't see anyone smiling at me. So think about, I mean, if our world was, if we were walking around before masks, and if we were walking around and nobody was smiling, we'd feel kind of weird or kind of, we'd be stressed. And now you can't see if people are smiling because their masks are covering their faces. And that one driver said, it's tough. You can't smile, and it makes them more anxious. Also being away from their family, worrying about going home and exposing family members, especially if they have young children or maybe aging parents or spouses with health issues that might be compromised. It was extremely stressful on our drivers. And then family issues. One driver said weddings were all canceled, family reunions were canceled, they couldn't see their families. One driver said she hadn't seen her kids since Christmas. You know, and one of them said, I can't hug people, I need that physical contact. And then again, worrying about going home and exposing your family to potential COVID-19 because you don't know if you've been exposed or not. And then I'm going to touch on the financial well-being. Had to shut down. One driver said she didn't want to run because she was at high risk, and so she didn't want to be exposed to COVID-19. Some of them, depending on what they were hauling, freight volumes were dropped. If they were hauling things like automotive, their freight dried up. If they were hauling like entertainment equipment, that dried up. So it depended on what they were hauling. And also freight rates were affected. And as one driver said, more broker loads and shorter hauls, working a lot harder for the same amount of money. So those were the negative ones. There were a few positive, and then the type of hauls, the food service company, a lot of restaurants were closed, so they weren't delivering to restaurants and schools and convention centers and things like that. So depending on what type of food products you're hauling, if it's bulk commodities, you probably were adversely affected. I mentioned trade shows, concerts, GM, and then entertainment industry. So it depended on what type of freight you were hauling, whether you were negatively affected. The ones that were positively affected were those that Midwestern retailer who retail was great. I mean, Walmart is up, Target is up. So those who were hauling products to big box stores kept running. And then they talked about they were saving money because they were bringing their food with them. So there was a little bit of positive financial effect for our drivers, but not much. And I mentioned harassment. And this president said the driver complaints and issues had increased more than normal, and the female drivers were being accosted. And that's unacceptable. That harassment is unacceptable anytime, but when we're all stressed out and anxious, for that to happen between our drivers makes it even worse for especially our female drivers. And then ATRI did research on delivery and found that female drivers were 83% more likely than men to be delayed 6 hours or more. And so add that to the stress. And I need to talk about this piece of data for a second, because female drivers weren't delayed because they were female. They were delayed because they weren't in there pushing to get loaded or unloaded. So for those of you who have female drivers, make sure that they're being assertive and going in and saying, hey, get me unloaded, because they need, typically male drivers are a little bit more vocal about getting in and out, and female drivers aren't. So you need to teach your female drivers it's okay to go in and be vocal, because you don't want them delayed longer than their male drivers. And that study is actually on the ATRI website, and you can get that, it's free. And then talking about defunded areas, police resources, drivers don't want to go into a place where they're potentially, their health is, or their physical safety is potentially compromised. Recently, I think it was a couple days ago I believe it was Portland, a truck driver was actually beat up in an area. So your drivers are scared to go into places that there's protests going on or there are defunded police departments. So we surveyed our drivers before COVID-19 and asked them how safe they felt. And on a scale of 1 to 10, they said 4.4. Now that's unacceptable. And for those of you who work inside a trucking company, if I were to say to you, how safe do you feel? And you told me that you felt safe going to work only half the time, wouldn't you want to do something about that? So that's one of the obstacles we're working on at Women in Trucking. How can we make the environment safer? And so safety culture at your company involves three things. How well maintained is your equipment? You all know that a breakdown on the side of the road is not safe for anyone. It's not safe for your driver, it's not safe for your equipment, it's not safe for the cars on the road. So how well maintained is your equipment, and will your driver suffer a breakdown, especially these days? The second is driving conditions. What are your expectations when a driver goes out on the road? Are you expecting them to drive if they're uncomfortable, if it's snow or maybe a tornado or hurricanes or an area of protest? What are the driving conditions, and what are your expectations on them completing their job? And then where are you sending them? The locations of your warehouses, if it's a dark area, not well lit, or no safety fences, or no security, or maybe a bad part of town, what are your expectations on sending your drivers into an area that might not be safe for them? So what's your company's safety culture? I'm going to just go quickly over why there's differences for females and males. Women activate their fear center more quickly than men, and women are driven by estrogen, which encourages bonding and connection and discourages conflict and risk taking. So the way we're wired makes women safer drivers because we take fewer risks, but it also means that we're not there pounding the desk at the loading dock saying, "Get me unloaded," either. So women are more collaborative and team oriented. So keep that in mind. And then what can drivers do? Social distancing, of course, good hygiene practices, but you as a carrier have to make sure that that happens. You have to make sure they have the equipment, the masks, the sanitization supplies, because a lot of times they can't get them on the road. Make sure the truck and the equipment is clean. Plan your routes. Make sure that the route includes a place for them to eat, places for them to stop, use rest areas, and make sure that their routes avoid areas that might have protests or defunded police. And then take care of yourself. Drivers have to take care of their self, of course, and put their own safety first. And then I'm going to keep going on carriers. Communicate. How are they doing? As I mentioned, give them supplies. Offer mental health counseling, which we actually at Women in Trucking have provided all of our CDL holder members with free mental health counseling through Aspire, and Norm's going to talk about that a little bit more. And then help them with the trip planning, as I mentioned. And then a lot of drivers are concerned about their company's financial well-being. So share as much as you can with them. Let them know that, yes, you're doing okay, or if you're not, be upfront with them. Because they don't want to, a lot of companies now are suffering because of COVID-19, and some companies are shutting down. Don't just surprise your driver. Communicate with them, share with them, say, hey, we're having some issues here, but we're going to do everything to keep you rolling. So be as transparent as possible. And then, as I mentioned, we provided 90 days of free health, both mental health and then passing their physical. So Fit to Pass is a way for drivers to get back, make sure that they have their medical for the 2 years instead of having issues. And then Talk Now is a 24-hour service for drivers to be able to call someone and just discuss things. And when I submitted this slide, I had thanks Amazon for their generosity. And I also need to thank Total Transportation of Mississippi, who actually allowed us to extend that for another 90 days. So all of the drivers at Women in Trucking Association, Canadian and US, have been given 180 days of free mental health counseling and Fit to Pass. And I'm sure Norman will mention that as well. So this is our website, womenintrucking.org, or our phone number. And with that, Chris, I think I did it in 20 minutes, as you said, so I'm going to pass it back to you.
Oh, thanks so much, Ellen. That was awesome. I do have a question from one of our guests, and I neglected to say at the beginning to our guests, please put your questions into chat, and I will direct them to our speakers. So, Ellen, this one is for you. Is the situation still on, or is it getting any better?
The accessibility to facilities, sit-down restaurants, there's some, but some truck stops still have them closed. There are more masks and hand sanitization and supplies that are available. So that's not as extreme as at the beginning, but the stress levels are still there. In fact, I think the stress levels have been exacerbated more lately because of the protests, the unfunding or the defunding of police. So it's changed more. At the beginning, it was more about the COVID, and now it's more about making sure your personal safety isn't compromised by going into areas of unrest.
Yeah, and you know, not to make any political statements, but it is factual that Canada is doing better in the fight against COVID than the US. So for Canadians, basically, if I was a driver, I'd be looking at it as if I'm going into an infected area every time I cross the border into the States. Because I believe, my brother lives in Florida, and I did a little math with him, and the infection rates for Florida compared to Ontario were at least 10 times higher by population. So for a Canadian to cross the border, I think it is extra stressful because we don't live in the States where you may be more kind of acclimatized to it, maybe. I don't know what the differences are, but we will have time for questions and answers, I believe, at the end of the webinar. So we'll get back into more questions. But with that, thanks so much, Ellen. That was awesome. Norman, I would ask you to take the microphone, and now you can expand on the services that are available to, I would imagine, everybody who subscribes to your company, but especially those from Women in Trucking. I didn't know, Ellen, that your members had access to this service, so that's awesome. Norman, I turn it over to you.
Thank you, Chris. And let me do a screen share.
You are good.
Okay, great. Let me get going. First of all, let me thank you and Naveen and the Trucking Network for bringing attention to this issue, and I really appreciate that. And secondly, I'm so fond of Ellen, but she's such a tough act to follow when you're doing presentations. So thank you for setting the bar so high, Ellen.
I want to say thank you to Ellen because she introduced me to you, and I think this issue was hanging there from a while, and we all are kind of ignoring, but it's there from the beginning. But now because of COVID, it's just, you know, it's adding up. Norman, please explain to us how we can make this better situation for everyone.
Absolutely. Let me share a little bit about Aspire. First of all, I'm a mental health professional. I'm one of the executives with Aspire. We're based in kind of a COVID hotspot of Georgia, Atlanta, Georgia, Chris. And we cover and serve a few million people in North America, employees and students. The company is about helping individuals and organizations achieve their potential. And one of our specific focuses is logistics and transportation industry. As Ellen said, we provide a specialized driver-centric health coaching program called Fit to Pass that helps drivers stay healthy enough to be safe, to continue to be licensed, and continue to drive and make their livelihood, and therefore protect their families as well. We also are proud to provide a service called Talk Now, as Ellen said. Happy to do that for women in trucking and the industry in general. As odd as it sounds, it's not easy in this modern age to actually immediately speak with a mental health professional. That's what Talk Now is about, provides immediate resources and support for people. It's particularly important for a mobile workforce like truckers. So I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute, but I wanted to call out a couple of services that we provide that we put a lot of thought and care in developing, specifically for professional drivers and the logistics industry. I wanted to call out just a few basic facts about common mental health conditions. And I put in some, in this slide, some Canadian statistics. This is basically true in America as well. Mental health conditions are much more common. The first statistic there calls out the fact that studies have shown for a couple of decades, really, that around 1 in 5 people have some type of mental health issue over the course of a year. A lot of those people don't get services, they don't get treatment about it. That statistic in itself is not calling out the stress that goes with non-diagnosable conditions, because folks like me who are mental health professionals think of diagnostic conditions. The 1 in 5 doesn't count people, for example, that are having stress associated with a marital conflict or the parenting issue, because those are not mental health diagnostic categories, or associated with a grief and loss event. So there's more distress than even that number indicates. It's just that the distress level is often hidden. It's not well brought out in the open or discussed. I wanted to call out a couple of the common broad diagnostic categories for mental health issues. The first one is anxiety disorders. Those are conditions such as a generalized anxiety or fearfulness. Fearfulness is the main feature of anxiety disorders. Obsessive compulsive disorder is one. Post-traumatic stress disorder is another. I called out depressive disorders. There's several different categories of depressive disorders. Bipolar disorder is one of them. Major depression is another. The hallmark features of depression are a depressed mood and kind of feelings of hopelessness. However, people may be depressed and not exhibit those symptoms. For example, with some people who have a depressive disorder, their primary symptom may be a sleep disturbance, or it may be overeating, or it even may be overuse of the internet or social media. It may be drinking excessively. So there's different symptoms for different people. Those can only be really discerned when people get a good assessment or speak with a mental health professional. The World Health Organization, by the way, has documented for several years that depressive disorders worldwide cause more lost work days than any other condition. So encourage people to think about that, to how widespread that is and how debilitating that is. Often depressive disorders occur in conjunction with a physical disorder, making the treatment of that physical disorder much more challenging for medical professionals. I wanted to call out some of the special challenges to kind of piggyback on what Ellen was discussing earlier, maybe saying it in different ways. I think that professional drivers in particular have restricted access to a few strategies that all of us use, even if we don't think about them every day. These are basic coping strategies and stress management strategies that we all employ and that we all normally have access to in normal times. Professional drivers, even in non-COVID ages, have less access to these types of support systems. So in other words, these are socializing with family and friends, getting regular exercise, getting good sleep and rest, and good nutrition and healthy eating are kind of the foundational underpinnings of well-being. During the pandemic, lots of folks have been restricted access to these types of resources. That's especially true for professional drivers. And as I was trying to say earlier, in the best of times, professional drivers aren't able to access these types of resources as well as others are. Now, professional drivers also have some other special challenges. And, you know, in the mental health world, you think of protective factors and you think of risk factors. The prior slide was about protective factors. This is about risk factors. So what are some of the special risk factors that professional drivers are exposed to? Ellen mentioned some of the real life comments from drivers about the unique stressors that they're experiencing related to the COVID pandemic, particularly in the US. Above and beyond that, so I won't go through all of those, but we heard some real life comments in that area. Drivers are also exposed to more chronic stress just from the driving lifestyle, because we know that an exposure to chronic stress has a negative impact on both our mental health and well-being, but also our physical health and well-being. And exposure to chronic stress tends to be a hazard for professional drivers. Now, all of us can be exposed to some type of traumatic event in our lives. Hopefully, none of us will be, but if you're a professional driver, your chances of being exposed to some type of horrible trauma are much greater than the average civilian. Ellen called out one about women being harassed or possibly even worse, assaulted. And of course, that applies to male drivers as well. But they're exposed to accidents and things like that to a greater degree than the average person. So that's another risk factor for drivers. I'm calling out that many drivers are in high-risk demographic categories for suicide. If you're an employer of professional drivers and the average age of your drivers are maybe in the 40s or 50s, and if most of them are males, that is a high risk. That right there is males at that age group. It's a high risk group for suicide. Doesn't mean they're going to suicide. It means as a group, they're at higher risk for suicide. Now you combine the things at the top of that slide that I had already gone over, that only makes that risk higher. The last point I wanted to make was sort of inherent risk factors and some barriers to services. By inherent risk factors, what I meant was this. In my experience in working with professional drivers in a professional context, I've seen quite a few who come from backgrounds, and I'm not painting the whole industry, but I have seen some who come to my attention who come from backgrounds that have featured a lot of trauma or featured situations that they're trying to get away from. So I think you see that more in this population maybe than you would in other occupational groups. And that also sets up people for being at a higher risk for mental health issues and risks to their well-being. And I think I'm going to talk about barriers in just a moment, but that is an issue throughout the mental health field. Or what are the barriers that people have to go through to access mental health services? One of the biggest barriers is the social stigma around this issue. That's why I'm always delighted to be able to discuss this issue in public and with interested people like those on the webinar who can participate in helping to tackle that issue of social stigma around mental health issues. So to get to a key question, I wanted to call out, what can you do? Everyone on this webinar, what can you do to support drivers' mental health? The first and foremost thing relates to what I just said. It's normalizing the issue of mental health. We are in a society where there is no usually inhibition about talking about our physical conditions, our aches and pains, the broken arm that we had, but we don't talk about mental health issues. And yet look at the large number of people that are experiencing these issues every day. But we don't always think about that in that terms. So I would encourage you to think about the images you have about mental health, how you talk about it to your employees, how you talk about it to your family and friends for that matter, so that we can kind of get this issue out in the open and make it more normal to talk about our mental health and well-being just as we do about our physical health and well-being. The second thing I would encourage you to think about, if you're in a position to do so, in terms of supporting driver health, driver mental health, is revisit your employee assistance program. And I'm, with my background, I'm a pretty tough critic of employee assistance programs. And I always encourage customers to visit with their employee assistance program, particularly now. Make sure that you understand its services. Make sure that you understand how well it's utilized. Make sure that you're working in hand in glove in partnership with your assistance program to make to create awareness of their services, to create as many channels as possible for people to select the best channel for them to seek assistance services. I would also encourage you to think about, if you don't have programs like this in place, to do what Ellen has done for her membership in Women in Trucking, which is to implement programs that give your drivers and your employees immediate access to mental health counselors. One of the barriers to accessing mental health services is delay. It's very important from a mental health perspective to assist people and to engage them in mental health services at the moment that they're ready for those services, so that if there's delays in scheduling or problems in accessing services, that time factor can cause people to give up, basically, and to not do anything. And from a mental health perspective, we want to see people earlier on in a process than later, so delay is not a good thing. It's not a good thing for them personally. It's not a good thing for their treatment prospects. I also encourage you to think about what kind of other avenues, like well-being screenings, mental health first aid training, things like that you can probably implement through your employee assistance program or through groups like ours that would supplement other services. When I say mental health first aid, I'm sure you all provide training on first aid, on physical first aid, but not every employer provides training on mental health first aid. That's services that help people to recognize and approach people who may have severe depression, who may be giving warning signs of suicide, and to try to give them some support and help them to access services that their employer provides. That would be something to think about. And a favorite theme of mine, as Ellen knows, is suicide awareness and prevention. It's in the mental health field, it's considered a silent epidemic. The rate of suicide in North America has basically tripled in the last 20 years. It's quite a sad statement about our society. So you need to think about that. Suicide is highly associated with depression, particularly one form of depression. And so it is the worst outcome from a mental health professional's perspective for someone having a severe type of a mental health issue. So consider what you're doing to promote suicide awareness and suicide prevention programs within your workforce. So those are some things that you can think about doing to support drivers' health. Again, I want to wrap up and be mindful of the amount of time that we have to try to kind of stick to my allotment of time, Chris. And I just wanted to wrap up by thanking everybody once again and appreciating your attendance today and your interest in this topic.
Well, thanks, Norm. That was awesome. And because I have the microphone now, I have a question, and I don't know whether it's really towards you or to Ellen. But you mentioned how suicide rates have gone up dramatically. Do we have any stats about suicides amongst truck drivers, amongst professional drivers?
That's a great question, and thank you for asking that. We do. They are limited, and the statistics that we have seen, and I'm a little handicapped here because there's not been enough behavioral health research done with truckers, which is a theme that that I talk about a lot because it's just not studied enough. However, professional drivers rank in the top 5 occupational categories for suicide.
And so I'm very thankful that you and Ellen are here today. However, the negative of that is the number of trucking companies that are here listening to you. I don't know that it's a hot topic yet in our industry, but I thank you guys. There are a couple of questions that I'll throw up to both Norm and to Ellen. The first one is from Joe. Do you find that because of all of this, that companies are getting sloppy because of the loss of money? So I guess it's money related. Are companies getting lax, I would say, in their handling of this pandemic? Well, I'll throw that to Ellen first, and then Norm, you can step in.
Well, I would say that some are, but the good companies that really care about their drivers are not. So again, and that was in my slide, like make sure that you're putting the driver first, make sure they have all the supplies they need. And so like Norm and I have talked with, like Total Transportation of Mississippi has sponsored the 90 days of Aspire and Talk Now and Fit to Pass. Very, very diligent company. Their drivers feel it, and they know that they're being cared for. So I will say that there's yes and no to that question, and hopefully you'll find the company that does take those precautions and put the drivers before money.
Yeah. Norm, do you have anything to add to that?
I would only add that I guess from our viewpoint, we do see the progressive companies coming forward, and we have seen actually a tremendous interest in mental health services recently. It's unfortunate it's taken this type of situation to bring that about. So it's hard for me to judge the entire industry, but we do see an increased amount of engagement from various organizations right now that seem to represent that progressive element within the what I call a progressive element, at least from my viewpoint, within the industry that really is engaged and cares about their employees in a holistic way.
Chris, I'd like to add something to that.
Yeah.
So one of the things that Norm and Aspire has found is that when they go in to work with a trucking company to give their drivers Fit to Pass. Fit to Pass is a way for drivers to pass their physical. There's a lot of companies that don't know how many of their drivers don't have a 2-year medical. In other words, a lot of drivers only have, some have 2 months because they have sleep apnea or diabetes or heart issues or whatever. My appeal to every carrier listening in on this, go and look and see what percentage of your drivers have 2-year medical cards. Because if you've got a lot of drivers with 2 months or 6 months or 1 year, those are your high-risk drivers, and you need to get to them now and find out what their health issues are so that they can get that 2-year medical. So Norm, do you want to comment on that as well?
It's an excellent point, Ellen, because what we do find is that this information gets siloed within companies, and that the people who are making decisions that can impact the well-being of drivers don't know that information. So that's one of the first questions we ask, and it's surprising in how few of those types of decision makers don't have that information at their fingertips or don't seem to grasp the importance of it. Because as Ellen said, if you have folks who are on a 1-year card, they're at risk, and they may, health-wise, and they may very well be your safest drivers that you want to retain. That's what our Fit to Pass coaching program is about. It's about helping those drivers maintain their health. So I think that's an excellent viewpoint, and it would be interesting to see how many people on the call are really aware of what those proportions of drivers are with the different card types.
So I think in the States, the medicals are done a little bit differently, because up here, and I'm not an expert in this area, but when I do have my tractor trailer license, and because of my age, I have to now go for a medical every year. but it's age driven. Once I pass my medical, it's there. We don't have a 6 month criteria and I wasn't aware that in the States it was different. So, and as you know, FMCSA accepts our medicals as part of our driver's license. So it would be, it's an interesting question about privacy and rights and all that kind of stuff. But I have a comment, and Kelly Lynn, who is one of Ellen, you must know Kelly because she's a woman in trucking driver ambassador. And I couldn't read the whole note because I was trying to listen when Norm was speaking. But what I did get out of it from scanning it is that they're finding people becoming lax in their COVID-19 fight. I guess they're dropping their guard down is how I would say it. And this is increasing exposure again to all of us who are out there. And I know statistically here where I'm from, it's the under 40-year-olds that typically now are getting infected with COVID and spreading it. So do you have a message for those who are in situations such as shippers, receivers, or maybe even truck stops, how they can help truck drivers stay safe out there?
Well, first, hi, Kelly Lynn, and she is our driver ambassador. And yes, that is an issue. And I think what Kelly Lynn is referring to is like maybe going into a shipper or receiver and they're not wearing masks or they aren't hand sanitizing. And I guess all we can do is, the carrier, I believe the carrier has an obligation to set the expectations. So if you're going into shippers that aren't maintaining cleanliness standards and maintaining COVID-19 mask standards and things like that, the carrier is the only one with the leverage to set those expectations because the poor driver is the one who's going to experience it personally. So again, some carriers are more proactive about this and others might not be. So I guess if you're a carrier, make sure that when you're setting up a load, ask them to please ensure that your drivers will be kept safe by using the proper protocols.
Yeah, I would like to add a little here. I think when mental issues or this mental health issues are overall for Canadian and Americans, we are actually at a very high ratio. I was reading a survey, 8 people out of 10 are dealing with mental health issues, average. It's huge. And for drivers, especially when they have different conditions, they are not sitting at their home, they are not working from an office, they are on the highway, different weather conditions, different circumstances they have to deal with every day. And I think that's an added stress there. And now there is not only their mental state of mind is not only impacted, their physical health is also impacted there because they are they are hyper, or they are, I would say, they are in stress, they are anxious, about so many things, about their own personal health, environment, weather, road conditions, their family, their kids. We all are in doing some kind of employment, and now their nature of their employment is they have to be away from home, away from their own city, from their family, but they still have the same needs and same responsibilities for their families to take care of. But now they have to make money to pay their bills. They have to do work to take care of their families, but now they are kind of helpless. They are out, they're anxious, they are tired, they are exhausted. There is no, especially during this time, there is no washroom to personal take care. They have health conditions as well, not only mental, but other health conditions. They normally get diabetes and high blood pressures and overweight, obesity, and all those things. Everything add to mental health. I think fleets really need to look into their mental health, their physical health, to create some kind of a good environment so they should not be feeling those things they are actually feeling right now. Yes, Chris, please.
Norm, Ellen, something to add to Naveen's comments? No? Okay, Lizzie, hopefully I'm saying that correctly. I think, I'll just read it from the comments. I think a lot about how to minimize natural isolation that comes from being on the road. What solutions are there that don't compromise driver safety and increased distracted driving? I think that's a great question. What tools do we have to help reduce isolation for truck drivers?
I'm going to defer to Norm on that one.
Well,
Sorry, Norm, Ellen threw you under the bus. She said this is your
she
question.
did. No pressure there, Chris. But I think in the best of times, as I said earlier, that's a big challenge for truck drivers. Even in this age of social media and all the connectivity that people have, sometimes that connectivity creates additional problems or creates a false sense of something that's not real. I think that what we have, Ellen hit on it earlier, I think, carriers need to communicate with their drivers, and they need to communicate in a genuine and caring way, and they need to have programs and resources to support drivers so that it's not just words, but it's actions. I think that goes an awful long way. I think that from our perspective, where we're looking at kind of remediating issues, that's why we developed the Talk Now program, which gives people basically immediate access to mental health professionals in a very innovative, non-traditional way where you don't have to set up appointments and make schedules and all of that. That's one way that we try to create that connectivity with a helping, compassionate and caring professional. Same kind of thing actually applies with the coaching programs, because it's very interesting, the very positive feedback you get from people who participate in the coaching programs who say, you know, I could have never done that if I didn't know that Nori was going to be on my back if I didn't, or that Nori didn't give me that tip or give me that help. So we do our services in ways to kind of create that connection. I think employers can address that through what level of communication and how caring is that communication. If I could add one thing, something I see in the industry, and you know, we're all interested in driver health. So that's the spirit I'm making this comment. I don't mean to be hypercritical of the industry, but you do see carriers that seem resigned to having a lot of turnover of drivers. And that seems to me to be a driving dynamic around maybe not investing in their health and in their well-being. And I think that's very short-sighted. I don't see that nearly to that degree in other industries. So I call that out. I hope that's a dynamic that can be changed in the industry, because I think it would be so much better for drivers and so much better for businesses.
Yeah, and
Chris, I will add.
Sorry, go ahead, Ellen.
Well, I think most of you, many people know that I was married to an owner-operator for 20 years and had small children, and this was before the ease of cell phones. And so the question about the isolation, we really tried to make him feel a part of the family. So we would give him a calendar and say, you know, on these dates, the kids have a ball game or they have a play or something. So please call home and ask them how the play went. So it's really about staying connected with your family and your friends. And we, as we mentioned, a lot of drivers are afraid to go home because they don't want to expose their families to COVID-19. So that makes it even more stressful. But we have to use technology to make sure that, I mean, look at us. We're all sitting here looking at each other and watching each other's body language on a screen. So I guess it's using technology to make sure that you do stay connected.
I have a question about to both Norm and Ellen. A lot of my customers in my business are family-owned trucking companies, and they are like 50 trucks and less. So they're not big fleets, is what I'm trying to say. Are there services available to them, Norm, specifically, that they could participate in fairly easily?
Yes, I think the programs that I have been referencing are scalable. And we even do programs, Ellen mentioned owner operators. We even provide these services to owner operators, which are even smaller in scale than the carrier with 20 trucks or 50 trucks.
That's good news. Thank you. And Ellen, I've got a question for you, and Norm can pop in on this one. You talked a little bit about what I would call culture in the company. And there was recently an article that I was reading that safety is all culture, basically. And this goes to Norm's point as well about turnover amongst the drivers. How can we increase our or better our culture, Ellen?
Well, the companies that walk the walk and not just talk the talk, I actually had, I don't know if some people saw, a driver actually posted on Twitter a Qualcomm message saying, hey, you're truck drivers, you're gonna deliver in this blizzard, even if you have to go 5 miles an hour. Would you wanna work for a company like that? So when a company says safety is our priority, drivers know whether it is or not. And they tell each other. So if you say, oh, your physical safety is our concern, but yet they send them to a loading dock in a, New York, the Bronx or whatever, and without being any concern about their personal safety, they're not walking the walk. So the companies, and again, Norm and I have both said there's good companies out there that really put the driver's personal safety, their physical safety, and their mental health first. And drivers know which ones it is. And so for the people on this call who are with carriers, I would challenge all of you to make sure that you're walking the walk and not just talking the talk.
Thank you. Norm, anything to add to that?
Well, it's hard to add to that, but I would just echo what Ellen says. Drivers are very perceptive, and they can tell the difference between the talk and the practice.
Well, I'd like to thank you both. I don't see any more questions right now, and it's just before the hour. So I would like to thank both Ellen and Norm for participating. This was awesome. And I would like Naveen now to step in and wrap up the webinar.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. It was great information I think we discussed today. And Chris, you are always awesome to ask those difficult questions to make them speak. And Ellen, you mentioned about safety culture in our organization. I think that's when we talk about safety culture in the organization, it's not only about maintaining your equipments or maintaining your logbooks, it's maintaining your workshops and all that. I think when we talk about safety in safety culture, it's more about your people, about your employees, whether they are in your office, front desk, working for your customer service, even working as a dispatcher or load planner, or your drivers are the main thing. It's when we talk about safety, their mental health, their physical health, their family, or are they happy? Why they leave? Because they are not happy. They are frustrated. They are frustrated because of what? They are not getting enough paid for their work, or they are not treated as a human being, or they are not taken care of as a normal, because they are just doing their job, and they should be treated equally like we expect as a office employee and all that. I think when I talk about safety, I look at every aspect: your equipment safety, your work behavior, your physical health, your work culture in your office. What is your culture at the office? And that adds up a lot. When we are talking about mental health, it comes back to your organization's growth, I guess. But I really want to say thank you to each and everyone. You shared great knowledge with our attendees today. And we will make sure, Chris, we will record. I have the recording. I will check, listen. And if there is any edits, or otherwise we will post this video on all of our social channels. And I will share this video recording with Norman, with Alan, with Chris, everybody. If anybody who's listening to this webinar, if they need a copy of this recording, please don't hesitate. Send me an email. I will be more than happy to share with this. And we will be, Chris, next webinar next Thursday on August the 27th, we have another great panel to discuss another great topic, and that's risk management, working with your insurance providers. And definitely that day, again, we will touch the mental health part again. And want to say thanks to each and everybody, and Ellen especially, thank you. It was a pride for us. You are on the board today. And Norman, I was always reading your bio and I was trying to figure out what his organization does and what they do. And Chris, again, thank you. You are awesome, man. Thanks.
Well, thank you. And I'd like to thank the Trucking Network and Naveen for highlighting this topic, because I think it's of huge importance. And it's one that the trucking industry, for many companies at least, have not yet addressed. So I think it was great. Thank you all. And with that, Naveen, I think we can wrap up the webinar.
Yeah, thank you again. And to all the participants, thanks again for joining, for spending your time with us today. Thank you.
Thank you.